Hi guys. So there's a case that's blown up in Rwandan media at the moment, and I thought it was worth talking about because it relates to what women can wear, and being a woman, I feel like I've got a vested interest in this. So all the fuss is about a woman called Lilian Mugabekazi, who is currently facing up to 2 years in prison for wearing a revealing dress at a music concert. She's charged with public indecency, with prosecutors accusing her of wearing clothes that were shameful and committing a serious crime. This follows in the footsteps of Uganda, where Simon Lokodo proudly announced in 2014, "If a woman wears a miniskirt, we will arrest her." At which point, 200 women in miniskirts promptly marched through Kampala in protest. Now, some people might drag out the old trope, "Oh, it's a Western influence that women dress like this." No, it's not. This is how Rwandan women used to dress. Proud and beautiful, with nothing to be ashamed of. Meanwhile, around the same time, this is how British women were dressing. They were corseted so tightly they passed out if they tried to walk up steps. Showing your ankle in public was considered indecent. We have spent over a century trying to escape from beneath the stifling sexual repression of the Victorians. And now it seems that elements in Rwanda are trying desperately to create a Victorian era of their own. Or perhaps an Iranian revolution. The hijab might be compulsory in Iran today. But before the 1979 revolution, it was perfectly normal to see women with flowing hair, short skirts, and a book in their hand, because women can be both beautifully dressed and intelligent. And I can understand people not wanting to hear this from a white foreign woman. But if you don't want to listen to me, listen to Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie.
Some people will say that a woman being subordinate to a man is our culture. But culture is constantly changing. Culture does not make people. People make culture. So if it is in fact true, if it is in fact true that the full humanity of women is not our culture, then we must make it our culture.
Whereas I do think that culture makes us to some degree, in that the culture we're born into shapes our formative years and our early sense of identity. It is just a starting point in life. And she's damn right when she says, people make culture. It's not sacrosanct. It's a choice. Less than 100 years ago in Britain, it was cultural that women didn't vote, that women were the property of their husbands, and that they had their children taken away from them if they dared to ask for a divorce. That was British culture, and God smite anyone who dared question this. But culture is continually developing and changing. We develop it and change it. I don't think this debate is really a racial issue between African values and Western values. I think it's a generational one. Values change with each generation. And if you believe in the Flynn effect, so does intelligence. Governments are usually made up of senior members of society, and there's a long-held belief that there's a tendency towards more conservative thinking with age. And whereas our brains don't fully develop until we're around 25, young people are generally more liberal, more open to experiences, and yes, thrill-seeking. Obviously, there are plenty of exceptions, but it's a general trend. So older people in power might say, it's our job to protect young people from themselves. We must step in here and stop them from making mistakes. This seems reasonable on certain levels, such as setting minimum age restrictions for drinking, driving, and sex, the things that can really get you in trouble if you don't think them through. But when it comes to something as innocuous as what you wear, it starts to feel a little less like it's for women's protection than it is for a man's sense of control. The reason that I say this is that the punishment for digression doesn't feel very protective. Let's look at another case. In 2020, 4 young women were arrested for posting risque photos of themselves on Instagram whilst they were drunk and possibly coerced by a man. But they weren't just prosecuted, they were publicly shamed, dragged in front of their communities by investigating officers, and posted on the Rwandan police social media stream so that the entire nation knew who they were and what had happened. This left me cold. We all know what it's like to be a teenager. We all did silly things we regret, usually on alcohol. For people of my age, we thank our lucky stars that social media didn't exist back then and no evidence remains. Which is why my heart went out to those girls. They had made a mistake which affected them more than it affected anyone else, and yet they were publicly humiliated by the authorities. A sensible course of action might have been to have a word with the girls' parents, explain what the internet is and why it's not a good idea to be posting intimate pictures online. Perhaps an education programme in schools might help, and maybe confiscating their phones and internet access for a few months. That's enough to make any teenager change their ways. But for authorities to shame vulnerable young people in that way is horrific. And they are vulnerable. We all are at that age, as we're discovering how the world works and our place in it. Adults should be there to guide, not to make a situation worse. These women now have their names and their story plastered all over the internet. What was originally a small local matter that could have been dealt with discreetly suddenly reached international syndication. And once it's on the internet, it's there for the rest of their lives. People will always be able to find out who they were. That is the true horror story. Not that some girls did what thousands of young girls do around the world every day, but the way in which it was handled by adults who should have known better, people who should seek to understand and de-escalate. And this is the big difference. The people writing these laws and enforcing them point to these women and go, look what they've done, be appalled. When most people are looking at this thinking, actually, what you've done is appalling. It's absolutely wrong on so many levels. Look at this woman. She's absolutely radiant. She's smiling, she's confident, she's enjoying herself. And you've taken this smiley, happy person and you've crushed her. Why? Why would you do that over a skimpy outfit? What is so terrifying about her boobs that you feel it could crumble the morality of a nation? I mean, personally, I would never wear that dress because I don't have the body for it. If I had the body for it, I might consider wearing that dress. She looks like a movie star. So maybe take a step back. Think about it for a minute in the rational light of day. Is this really the direction we want to go in terms of women's rights in Rwanda? Is this really the message to be sending out? Do we trust men so little that we think they'll fall apart at the mere glimpse of a nipple? And what does it mean for tourism? Can you imagine that conversation around the coffee table? So, darling, do you want to put on your bikini and go to the beach? Or do you fancy the country where you get thrown in jail for wearing hot pants? Rwanda champions itself on equality for women. Let's not add the caveat, so long as they do what men say. Between the pandemic, climate change, real serious crime, and the soaring cost of living, there's so many more important things to focus on. Can we just let these women go home and move on?